Habari, Gani. Yes, it's the second day of Kwanzaa, and today's Kwanzaa principle is Kugichagulia, which means self-determination. And what is self-determination? It's basically motivating yourself to do those things that you want to do those things that will make you successful. A lot of times when we think about self-motivation and self-determination, we look at it as an adult perspective or from an adult perspective. But I have met children who have such self-determination that it has motivated me to take a look at myself and see what's holding me back and see why I can't achieve those things that I want to achieve. So today I'm going to read a book about a young girl whose self-determination first changed a community, and then it changed a state, and then it changed the country. And I'm going to read a book today about Ruby Bridges. Ruby Bridges was born in a small cabin near Tylerton, Mississippi. They were poor, very, very poor. Her daddy worked picking crops, and they barely got by. There were times when they didn't have much to eat. The people who owned the land were bringing in machines to pick the crops, and so her daddy lost his job, and that's when they had to move. She remembers leaving. She was 4 years old. In 1957, the family moved to New Orleans. Ruby's father became a janitor. Her mother took care of the children during the day, and after they were tucked in bed, Ruby's mother went to work scrubbing floors in a bank. Every Sunday, the family went to church. We wanted our children to be near God's Spirit, Ruby's mother said. We wanted them to start feeling close to Him from the very start. At that time, black children and white children went to separate schools in New Orleans. The black children were not able to receive the same education as the white children. It wasn't fair, and it was against the nation's law. In 1960, a judge ordered 4 black girls to go to 2 white elementary schools. 3 of the girls were sent to McDonald 19. 6-year-old Ruby Bridges was sent to first grade in the William Friends Elementary School. Ruby's parents were proud that their daughter had been chosen to take a part in an important event in America's history, and they went to church. They sat there and prayed to God that they'd be strong and they'd have courage and that they'd get through any trouble, and that Ruby would be a good girl and she'd hold her head up high and be a credit to her own people and a credit to all the American people. They prayed long and hard. That's a lot to put on a 6-year-old, isn't it? That's a lot. I don't know if I could do that at my age. On Ruby's first day, a large crowd of angry white people gathered outside the France Elementary School. The people carried signs that said they didn't want black children in a white school. People called Ruby names. Some wanted to hurt her. The city and state police did nothing to help Ruby. The President of the United States ordered federal marshals to walk with Ruby into the school building. The marshals carried guns. And I just want you to see this picture of a 6-year-old having to have the federal government to walk her into school. That's some pressure. But she was determined. Every day, for weeks that turned into months, Ruby experienced that kind of school day. She walked to the French school surrounded by marshals, wearing a clean dress and a bow in her hair and carrying her lunch pail. Ruby walked slowly for the first few blocks. As Ruby approached the school, she saw a crowd of people marching up and down the streets. Men and women and children shouted at her. They pushed toward her. The marshals kept them from Ruby by threatening to arrest them. Ruby would hurry through the crowd and not say a word. And this is a picture of Ruby being bullied, not by somebody on a playground, not by a person her age or a person her size, but grown men and women taunting and bullying a 6-year-old child. The white people in the neighborhood would not send their children to school. When Ruby got inside the building, she was all alone except for her teacher, Mrs. Henry. There were no other children to keep Ruby company, to play with and learn with, or to eat with. Every day, Ruby went into the classroom with a big smile on her face, ready to get down to the business of learning. She was polite. She worked well at her desk. Mrs. Henry said, She enjoyed her time there. She didn't seem nervous or anxious or irritable or scared. She seemed as normal and relaxed as any child I've ever taught. So Ruby began learning how to read and write in an empty classroom, in an empty building. Can you imagine you're a 6-year-old child and you're the only one, not just the only one in the classroom, but the only one in the entire building? That's some pressure. But she was determined. Sometimes I'd look at her and wonder how she did it, Mrs. Henry said. How she went by those mobs and sat here by herself and yet seemed so relaxed and so comfortable. Mrs. Henry would question Ruby in order to find out if the girl was really nervous and afraid, even though she seemed so calm and confident. But Ruby kept saying she was doing fine. The teacher decided to wait to see if Ruby would keep on being so relaxed and hopeful if she gradually began to wear down, or even decide that she no longer wanted to go to the school. One morning, something happened. Mrs. Henry stood by a window in her classroom as she usually did. Watching Ruby walk toward the school, suddenly Ruby stopped, right in front of the mob of howling and screaming people. She stood there, facing all those men and women. Again, she was not facing people that were her age. She was facing adults, grown men and women. Mrs. Henry saw Ruby's lips moving and wondered what Ruby was saying. The crowd seemed ready to kill her. And that is not figuratively speaking. If they thought they could get away with it, and they probably could have, they would have killed Ruby. The marshals were frightened. They tried to persuade Ruby to move along. They tried to hurry her into the school, but Ruby wouldn't budge. Ruby stopped talking and then walked into the school. When she went into the classroom, Mrs. Henry asked her what happened. Mrs. Henry told Ruby that she had been watching and that she was surprised when Ruby stopped and talked with the people in the mob. Ruby became irritated. I didn't stop and talk with them, she said. But Ruby, I saw you talking, Mrs. Henry said. Your lips were moving. I wasn't talking, said Ruby. I was praying. I was praying for them. You see, every morning Ruby had stopped a few blocks away from school to say a prayer for the people who hated her. This morning she'd forgotten until she was already in the middle of the angry mob. When school was over for that day, Ruby hurried through the mob as usual. After she walked a few blocks and the crowd was behind her, Ruby said her prayer. She repeated it twice that day, before and after school. That is some self-determination for someone 6 years old to have to face a mob every single day of school. And that's how it was for her every single day. I believe the next year they started sending the white kids back to school. But even then, she still didn't play with them. They were not allowed to play with her. And so she still faced a lot of adversities. But she was determined she was going to learn, she was going to get an education, and she was going to be a success. Now, Miss Bridges is not an ancestor. She is an elder. She is still amongst us. Her story is definitely one of gratitude. We thank her for what she did because it definitely changed the community around her. It changed state laws. It changed a lot of things for this country. So Miss Ruby Bridges, we salute you. We thank you for your self-determination. We appreciate everything that you did. Thank you for your self-determination. Ashe.